Daniel Boone. You know the gist, the first white man to set eyes on the bluegrass of Kentucky. He rejected civilization, barely knew how to read. He was tall, wore coonskin caps, hated Indians, wrestled bears, swung vine to vine like Tarzan, brought the One Ring to Mordor, probably. Of course, none of that is actually true. You know how humans like their tall tales. Daniel Boone's life was shrouded in legend even in his own lifetime. After his death, exaggerated biographies, poems, movies, and a successful TV show reduced him to the archetypical frontiersman. So much so that if you're like the jackalope here, you still haven't put together that he and Davy Crockett were two different people. In fact, Boone didn't wear coonskin caps, and he was only around 5'8", which is kinda puny, even for a human. As for his conflicts with Native Americans, he once said of them, "I am very sorry to say that I ever killed any, for they have always been kinder to me than the whites." For a time, he was even adopted by a Shawnee chief, but more on that later. Never fear the jackalope, we're here to separate fact from fiction on this episode of Bigfoot's Great American History Show. Born in 1734, Daniel Boone was raised in a Quaker household in Pennsylvania. It was there, in the woods among the wolves, that he learned to hunt, first with a spear and then with a rifle. He did not go to school. Evidently, his dad once said to a concerned schoolteacher, "Let the girls do the spelling, and Dan will do the shooting." He did learn how to read, however, and later in life would even serve 3 terms in the Virginia General Assembly. In his youth, 2 older siblings were kicked out of the local Quaker community for marrying worldlings, or non-Quakers. When his father refused to make a public apology for the second such marriage, the Quakers took away his oats too, so to speak. Perhaps not coincidentally, shortly thereafter, the family picked up and moved to North Carolina. At 21, Daniel married the love of his life, Rebecca Bryan, with whom he eventually had 10, count 'em, 10 children. And God bless her, I cannot even imagine. Speaking of rabbits, Boone provided for his growing family as a hunter and trapper, selling skins and pelts to fur traders. Alas, as the population east of the Appalachians grew, game grew scarce, and his fur and pelt business suffered. He considered moving to Florida for a time, but the hunting there was poor, and Rebecca was unwilling to move so far away from friends and family. So it was that Boone made the fateful decision to head west across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Cue John Denver. Not really, though. We cannot afford that. In later years, Boone would cringe at the popular belief that he had ever rejected civilization. In truth, he never lived alone in the woods, writing a convoluted manifesto like some proto-Unabomber. No, indeed, opportunity was the name of the game. He had heard of rich hunting lands on the other side of the Appalachians. Incidentally, the name Kentucky comes from the Iroquois word Kentucke, or lush meadows. To be sure, by the time Boone first set eyes on the lush meadows of Kentucky in 1767, other white men had been there ahead of him. The famous Kentucky bluegrass, in fact, is not native to the area and was only introduced to the New World with the arrival of Europeans in the 1600s. Of course, humans had been living west of the Appalachians for much longer than that, and unfortunately for Boone, the Shawnee also depended on furs and pelts for their livelihoods. As far as they were concerned, the lands in question were their hunting grounds, and Boone was poaching their game. In late 1769, a band of Shawnee captured him, seized his pelts, and told him to make like Michael and beat it. Boone was persistent, if nothing else. 4 years later, he and about 40 others, including his family, attempted to establish the first permanent British settlement in Kentucky. This time, a small supply party, including Boone's son James and a number of enslaved blacks, was attacked and killed by a band of Delaware, Shawnee, and Cherokee. When the rest of the settlers heard of it, they resolved to turn back. Hostilities in these parts eventually led to the outbreak of Lord Dunmore's War, fought in 1774 between Virginia militia and the Shawnee and Mingo. In October of that year, following the Battle of Point Pleasant, Shawnee chief Cornstalk, facing heavy pursuit by the Virginians, gave up the ghost and signed a treaty turning over Shawnee hunting rights south of the Ohio River. A few years earlier, the powerful Iroquois Confederacy had sold their claims on the lands south of the Ohio to the British in the Treaty of Stanwix. With the new Shawnee Treaty in place, a North Carolinian land speculator named Richard Henderson hired Boone to help establish a brand new colony in the area, which he called Transylvania. Seriously, that's what he called it. Before long, Boone had helped Henderson arrange for the purchase of the remaining Cherokee land claims south of the Ohio, thus clearing the road to clear the road. Literally. In March of 1775, Boone and about 30 axemen blazed the Wilderness Road through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky, a route of 200 miles, over which some 200,000 settlers would eventually follow him westward. Boone himself would settle along the southern bank of the Kentucky River at a settlement called Fort Boone, which Henderson shortly renamed Boonesborough. Seriously, you humans need to work on naming things. Incidentally, if you're curious why there's no state of Transylvania on your US map, the Virginia Assembly would void Henderson's deal with the Cherokee in 1778. And fair enough, the deal was in direct violation of the Proclamation of 1763 and the Royal Charters of Virginia and North Carolina. In July of 1776, while the rest of the United States celebrated its newly declared independence, Daniel Boone was busy searching for his 13-year-old daughter Jemima, who, along with 2 other girls, had been captured by a raiding party led by the Cherokee chief Hanging Maw. Remember, Boone had good reason to fear the worst. His oldest son, James, had been tortured and killed during their ill-fated first attempt to settle in Kentucky. This time around, the plot might have come straight out of a Hollywood movie. In fact, it would later serve as the inspiration for a scene in James Fenimore Cooper's novel, The Last of the Mohicans. Jemima and her friends dropped twigs and bits of cloth for their father's party to follow. 3 days after the kidnapping, Boone launched a successful ambush a few miles from the Licking River, and all 3 girls returned home unharmed. In true Hollywood fashion, Jemima would later marry one of her rescuers. Treaty or not, the Shawnee continued to resist the encroachment of settlers onto their hunting grounds. The land, after all, had been forcibly taken from them. Meanwhile, Chief Cornstalk himself had been murdered on a diplomatic visit to Virginia. In 1778, the Shawnee chief Blackfish, now allied with the British in the war against the Americans, captured Boone, then a captain in the Virginia militia, along with 30 other men. As was tradition, the Shawnee adopted some of their prisoners to replace warriors who had died in battle. Notably, Blackfish chose Boone to replace his own son, who had recently died, in the very ambush that had freed Boone's daughter Jemima. How's that for irony? Boone was given the name Sheltowee, or Big Turtle. For 4 months, he lived peaceably with his captors. They got along so well, in fact, that Boone would later be court-martialed for allegedly pulling a Benedict Arnold and switching sides in the war. He would be found not guilty, and even promoted to major after the trial. And fair enough, when the Shawnee made plans to launch another attack on Boonesborough, Boone escaped and traveled 160 miles in 5 days to defend his home. In 1784, on Boone's 50th birthday, a land speculator named John Filson published The Discovery, Settlement, and Present State of Kentucky, in which he interviewed Boone about his adventures. The book was a great success, and the legend of Daniel Boone was born. Alas, Boone never reaped the financial rewards of his own celebrity. As it was, he failed spectacularly as a land speculator. Thefts, failures on his part to fill out paperwork, and subsequent lawsuits left him deep in debt. In 1799, he left the United States entirely, settling in Spanish Louisiana in present-day Missouri. The Spanish welcomed the famous American, granted him 850 acres of land, and even made him a district syndic, or a sort of sheriff, judge, and jury all rolled into one. Unfortunately for Boone, Louisiana was given to France in 1800 and sold to the United States in 1803. Having preferred to live with his sons, he had never properly settled on his own land grant, and as such he lost his claim on it. President James Madison would later sign a bill returning it to him. Of course, once word of that got out, Boone's creditors in Kentucky came calling, and he was forced to sell the land to pay them. Boone died in 1820, at the age of 85, in his son's home. He was buried near present-day Marthasville, Missouri, next to his wife, Rebecca. But wait, there's more! In 1845, the proprietors of a cemetery in Kentucky acquired permission to dig up and rebury Boone's famous body. They did so with all the pomp befitting an American legend, which was all well and good, except that it might not have been Boone's famous body that they dug up and reburied. In 1983, a forensic scientist studying a cast of the reburied skull found that it belonged, in fact, to a black man. Naturally, later studies cast doubts on those findings, so now no one knows for sure where Daniel Boone is actually buried. Which seems fitting, in a way. Until next time, this is Bigfoot saying so long and save me a seat at your next campfire.